adjust it a little bit. A bit of text is falling up. That's okay. Okay, let's start. Okay, so the chanting for today is for the following people. Yeah, we have maybe the monastics first of all, Venerable Kagata with his broken pelvis and hernia, and then we have Brahmajala, I just mentioned her as well, and Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi with his chronic headaches, and maybe also Venerable Nana Ramita, who died in Sri Lanka about just after the New Year. Just do one more chanting for him. And we have the following lay people on the list. We have Thomas and family, Mai and Ray, Pat and family, May and Tony for health and happiness. We have Ryder and Anna Leah, Alicia and Vanessa Waters for COVID. We have Cora Pritchard against COVID. We have Jane Skillen, yeah, breast cancer. Matt Gibson for health and support. Ted Stamens. Ted Stevens. Okay, so, right, okay, yeah. With leukemia, is that right? Yeah. And Mary McKinney with blood cancer. And then we have Helen King for cancer recovery. We have Octavie Siska and Mum for well-being. Dan Roth with stroke. Namali's son for well-being. Grace for her lungs and back. And we have Winsome with cancer. Okay. We do the usual 3 chants and yeah. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Asevana chabalanam panditanam ติรูปเดสวาโสจะภูเบจักขตปุญญาตาอาตัสสัมมาปานิดิชาเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังปาหุสาชัญชสิปัญชวินัยโยจัสสุสีทิโตสุภาสิตาชายาวาจาเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังมาตาปิตุอุปาทานะปุตตะดาราสสังฆาโหอนาคุลาจักขามันตะเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังตานัญชะธัมมจริยาชัญญาตกานัญชะสังฆาโหอนาลาจานิกามาเนตังมังกาลมุตตมังอารติวิรติปาปะมาจาปานาจาสัญญาโมอาปะมาโลชะนาเมสุเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังการะโวชะนิวาโตจะสันตุติจักตัญยุตากาเลนะธัมมัสสะวะนังเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังคันติจะโสวาจาสัตตะสัมมานานัญชะดาสนะคาเลนะธัมมัสสะกาชะเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังทัพโพจะบรมจาริยาชาริยสัจานาดาสนะนิบานาสัจฉิกิริยาชาเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังพุทธัสสะโลกธัมเมอิชิตังยาสนะกัมปติยโสกังเวราจังเขมังเอตังมังกาลมุตตมังเอตานิสานิกาตวานัสสะบาตมะปาราจิตาสาบาตสันติกาชันติตันเตสังมังกาลมุตตมันติยังเจนชีวิตังเอตวาหุรังวาสาเกสุวายะรัตนังปานิทังนาโนสมังอาติตถากเตนาอิดัมปิบุเรรัตนังปานิทังเอเทนะสัจเจนะสุวัติโหตุคายังวิรากังอมตังปานิทังยาดาจักาสักยมุนิสมาหิโตนาเตนะดาเมนะสมาธิกินสิดัมปิดัมเมรัตนังปานิทังเอเจนะสัจเจนะสุวัติโหตุยังบุดาเสโตปาริวานายิสุจิสัมมาวิมานันตาริกายามาหุสัมมาดินาเทนะสมุนาวิจัติดัมปิสัมเมรัตนังปานิทังเอเตนะสัจเจนะสุวัติโหตุเยปุกาลาอาตัสสะตังปัสสะตาชาตาริเยตานิยุกานิโหนติเตดาคิเนยะสุกตาสัสสะวะกะเอเตสุดินานิมหาปาลานิอิดัมปิสังเกรัตนังปานิทังเอเตนะ sache na suvati ho tu Yesu payuta manasa dale nani kamino Gotama sasanang hite patipata amatang vigaya lada muda nebuteng kunjamana idam pisange ratanang panita etena sache nasuvati hotu kinang purana navang natisang bhava virata cita yatike bhavasme tekina bija avirul hichanda nimanti dira yatayang padipo idam pisange ratanang panita etena sache nasuvati hotu karaniya mata kusalena yantang santang pada abhisamecha sako uju chasuvacho chasamudu anatimani santu sako chasuvaro chapakicho chasalahu te sante veyo chanepako chapagamo kulesu ananukido nakshakurang samachare kenshiyena vinyo pare upavadeyam sukino vakemino ontu sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata yeke shripana bhutati tasava tavarava anavasesa dighava ye mahantava majima rasaka anukatula dita yecha dita yecha dure vasante avedure Bhutava sambhave seva sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata naparo parang nikubetanatima yantakha takshinang kinchivayaro sanapati gasanya nanya manya sadhu kamicheya dayatani yang putang ayusa ekapu tamanurake evam pisababute sumanasang bhavaye aparimanang vetan savalokasme manasang bhavaye aparimana kodang nado chatiriyansha asambhada averang asapata titan sharang nisinova sayanova yavata savigata mido etang sating aditeya brahmameta vihara edamaruti tinshadupagama silava dasanena sampano kame suvineya yeda mahijatu Abhaseyam Punareti Ete Peso Bhagava Arahang Samba Sambuddho Vija Sharana Sampano Sugato Lokavidu Anutaro Purisa Dhamma Sarati Sata Deva Manusana Buddho Bhagavati Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanaiko Pachata Veditamo Vinyuhi Tisupatipano Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ujjapatipano Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Nyayapatipano Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Samichipatipano Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Yadidang Chattari Purisa Yuga Niyata Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anutarang Punyaketa Lokasati Nati me sarananganya Buddho me saranang vara Etena sachavajena sotite hotu sampada Nati me sarananganya Tammo me saranang vara Etena sachavajena sotite hotu sampada Nati me sarananganya Sangho me saranang vara Etena sachavajena sotite hotu sampada. And now the Quell's protection chant for the various monasteries. Ati loke sila guno sachang soche anudaya tena sachena kaha me sachakiriya anutarang avajitva dhamma balang saritva Ubakejine Sachabalang Abhasa Yasachakiriya Akasahang Santipaka Apatana Santipada Avanshana Mata Pita Chanikanta Jata Veda Patikama Sahasache Kate Maya Mahapajalito Siki Vaje Siso Lasakari Sani Undaka Patva Yata Siki Sache Name Samonati Esame Sacha Paramiti.
Just one moment. Okay. Few loops here. Oops. Oh,
okay. Okay, very good. All right, so here we go. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to continue with the famous Brahmajala Sutta, Brahma's net. And just to very briefly recap, we're now getting into the 62 kinds of wrong view. And this is like a kind of clearing the ground for the path, because the right view is always at the beginning of the path. It starts off with samma ditthi, and everything goes from there. So this is just one way of thinking about samma ditthi, these 62 views. And we have had a look at the 4 first kinds of wrong view last couple of weeks ago. And those views are all about eternalism. And now we're going to move on to partial eternalism, which is kind of a similar kind of vein. And those eternalist views, I made out the case last time, are very, basically seem to be very closely related to what is, were the Brahmanical views at that time, with the idea of an eternal mind or eternal God, Brahma and Atta being basically interchangeable, and very similar to what is today called Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, which is like often considered the pinnacle of the kind of Brahmanical or Hindu system of meditation and philosophy. And so here the Buddha is basically countering that very system. So these are very, I think, as I mentioned last time, these are very important things, very important views to counter, because it is very common in the present day to conflate Buddhism with these kind of views and think they are the same thing. It's a very common problem. And so to actually see these views here in the suttas and to make the case that the Buddha actually, from the very beginning, said that these things were wrong view and the wrong way of thinking about the Dhamma and Buddhism is actually very useful. And it gives you that insight and that kind of extra baggage, if you like, to understand the Buddhist teachings, and then also, for your own support and also for support of other people in the future. So very useful. So now we're going to come to partial eternalism, and you can guess straight away that this is very much related to the previous view, because the previous view was eternalism. This is partial eternalism. It's the word eternalism, which is the problem. So the problem is basically the same kind of issue with the two views. But partial eternalism has usually more related to the idea of a creator God. And the idea that there is a creator God who is eternal, always been there, and then there are things that are created by that God, which are not eternal in quite the same way. So the Buddha here, he counters some of the most prevalent views that exist in society and seem to have existed in society since the beginning of human existence, going back to the very earliest times, or at least in historical times. Things like the eternal, the ground of all being, the Hindu idea of Advaita Vedanta, and then the creator God. These are very kind of fundamental parts of human philosophy from a historical perspective. And all of these things are here being countered by the Buddha. So it's actually, I don't know, it's very powerful and very interesting because it gives you right here, collected together, this very clarity about how the Buddha viewed the world compared to how almost anyone else views the world, or has viewed the world, or probably will view the world, because these are almost like eternal things. These kind of views always seem to come out in humanity, and probably always have, as long as there has been samsaric existence. I guess these views have existed there. So it's interesting how we always take our own age to be so special, how we always tend to
overestimate our own importance and how we are making progress or whatever. But I always find it in the suttas is always almost the exact opposite. It's like, well, not opposite, but it's this sense that you're never going anywhere. It's just going round and round and round. The same thing. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just the same thing going again. And this is kind of the sutta. So this is very contrary to how we normally think about our own evolution as human beings in terms of technology or science or whatever it is, but also in terms of religion. We tend to think of ourselves as becoming more sophisticated in religious terms, over time. We've given up all those kind of multiple gods in the past, threw those multiple gods out, and then we kind of whacked all those gods together and it became one god, and then that god became more refined, kind of standing behind, not kind of so interfering in the human realm anymore. It was more like standing behind, it was the ground of the human realm, the universal consciousness. And we think that we're becoming more and more sophisticated. And of course, over short historical periods, maybe we are, but in the big scheme of things, it's just like waves on the ocean going back and forth. And in fact, I would argue that the common argument among anthropologists, the idea that we moved from a polytheistic worldview where there are many different gods, and we moved from there to a what's it called? One god, a monotheistic worldview. That is often considered like progress. Because you kind of simplify things. The previous thing was just that was superstition. So we moved to the kind of more Unitarian view of a monotheistic world system. And then the next step is then to abandon even that and becoming an atheist. That's kind of the next step. And this is all considered advances. But it's just conceit that these things are advances. Are they really advances? Is there may be certain aspects of those views that are wrong, but if you look at it from a Buddhist point of view, the polytheistic idea seems to be much more realistic than the monotheistic point of view. In fact, it is fairly obvious to me that the polytheistic view is actually something that you can ascertain through experience, because these are gods very much like us. They come and go, they get born and die, just like us. And these are things you can see. You can experience impermanent entities, call them gods or human beings. But the monotheistic God, which has always been there, is something you can never ascertain through experience. It is always going to be philosophy, always going to be speculation. And that's why, to my mind, it is such a dodgy idea, this kind of creator God, the eternal God. It's really dodgy. It doesn't stand on anything. It's this kind of made up by human beings. And it doesn't have any kind of really a basis for existence apart from that. And I think it's important to make these arguments, because when you think about them, actually, they're pretty obvious. So to me, polytheism is far more acceptable than monotheism. And it's the exact opposite of what kind of we often think about in our modern world, which is fascinating here. Anyway, let's come to these views. Partial eternal. There's 4 different kinds of views. So I'll do what I usually do and read out what is here, and then we will discuss these things in a little bit of detail as we go through this. So there are some ascetics and Brahmins who are partial eternalists, who assert that the self and the cosmos are partially eternal and partially not eternal on 4 grounds. So again, just to remind you, ascetics and Brahmins, this is the group of people who were religious seekers and also philosophers at that time. They kind of combined the idea of philosophy with religious seeking into one group. And they had all kinds of views, and some of them were partial eternalists. They said that's parts of our existence, or parts of the world which is eternal, are the parts that are not. And the thing that they assert this about is, as we saw last time, the self and the world, or the self and the cosmos. And just to remind you what this means, because it's kind of strange from a modern point of view, the self and the cosmos, what on earth are you talking about? And the idea is, of course, in the Hindu system or the Brahmanical system, the self and the cosmos are very closely related, because the cosmos is really just another way of thinking about Brahma. Brahma is like the kind of the consciousness, or the consciousness behind everything, or the being behind everything. And the cosmos, in some ways, can just be considered as a reflection of that consciousness behind everything. And the self and that Brahma, they are ultimately the same according to this philosophical system. Yeah? Atta and Brahma being really ultimately unified. And that's why when you attain a state of samadhi, then you argue, well, this is it. I've attained that cosmos, the unification of the self and the cosmos. So this is why the self and the cosmos are always talked about in this way. Basically, it means like everything, yeah, the world, everything there is. That's essentially what it comes down to. So there's four kinds of reasons, arguments for this partial eternalist view. What are the four grounds on which they rely? So we'll have a look at the first one. There comes a time when, after a very long period has passed, this cosmos contracts. As the cosmos contracts, sentient beings are mostly headed for the realm of streaming radiance. Okay, I'll just read through the whole paragraph so we have a little background there. There they are, mind-made, feeding on rapture, self-luminous, moving through the sky, steadily glorious, and they remain like that for a very long time. So this already says something about the Buddhist outlook about the universe. So it starts off with there comes a time after a very long period has passed that this cosmos contracts. This is the idea of the loko sangvatati. I discussed this, I think, a little bit last time, the idea of sangvatati and vivatati being almost equivalent, almost exactly the same as the English word evolve and devolve. Yeah, it's something evolve and something comes together afterwards. And that's kind of very interesting from a modern cosmological view, and I think it is actually correct, as I mentioned last time, to translate this as the cosmos contracts and expands. But one of the interesting things here, this first phrase that comes here, we were just discussing in the car today on the way back from work about the Aganya Sutta. And this phrase here is exactly the same thing as you find in the Aganya Sutta. There comes a time when, after a very long time has passed, the cosmos contracts. Yeah, so it starts out with the cosmos already being in existence, and then they have the contraction of the cosmos coming. Yeah, and the Aganya Sutta starts out in exactly the same way. Yeah. And as Ajahn Sujato pointed out, this is almost like starting with the end of the universe, because the contraction of the cosmos, it kind of ends in this big cataclysm. Yeah, and this is how it is described also in the suttas. And then it talks about the evolution after that cataclysm has happened and how the world evolves. And it's very similar to what we see here. So in Buddhism, we don't we don't really have a creation myth in Buddhism, which is interesting. We have more like just we start off when things end rather than when things begin, which is kind of cool because it gives this idea, this cyclical idea of things, which is, of course, what Buddhism is all about, including the cosmos itself. And then we have this idea that when the cosmos contracts, sentient beings are mostly headed for the realm of streaming radiance. This is the Abhasara Loka. And the Abhasara Loka is basically equivalent to the second jhana realm. So the expression here for headed towards is sangvatati, which is, these beings are called sangvatanika, which means they are moving there or going there or heading there or whatever. And it is an expression that seems to be roughly equivalent to rebirth in the suttas. It seems to basically mean that they get reborn in the realm of streaming radiance. And of course, it's kind of strange, right? How can beings in general, for the most part, be reborn in the realm of streaming radiance? How does this make sense? Does that mean you get a free holiday in the Abhasara Loka? Or what's going on here? You're supposed to suffer as a human being and kind of get your act together, but does that mean you get reborn there just like that? And to me, it seems very unlikely, because the way you get reborn in a realm like this is because you have a pure mind. How can you just somehow get rid of all the defilements and suddenly get reborn there? I don't know. I have a hard time understanding how that's possible. So my understanding of this is that the cosmos gradually contracts, and then beings will pass away or whatever. And at the point when the cosmos is really contracted, all the other realms have disappeared. Those beings are already gone, and those beings that remain, well, they are mostly in the realm of streaming radiance. That's how I understand this. In other words, once the cosmos is about to reach the final crunch or whatever you want to call it, then the beings that are left are in that realm. And they are mostly in that realm. Why? Well, because it's even less likely to get reborn in a higher realm, and all the other realms are destroyed. So what happens to those beings? I don't know, maybe they're reborn in a different universe, or a different kind of, I have no idea, something like that, And that's what to me, makes the most sense in this kind of scenario. But it's one of those things that if you have any good ideas what is going on, I asked Ajahn Brahm, and Ajahn Brahm said, well, you just get reborn there because, there's nowhere else to go. And I have a really hard time understanding that that's possible. And I'm not the kind of person who I don't tend to just believe Ajahn Brahm just because he says so. That's not the kind of way I work. So if I can't understand it, well, then I can't understand it. But anyway, for your information, that's what Ajahn Brahm said. So if you wish, you can just follow along what he said. But I must admit, I remain slightly skeptical. Anyway, so let's leave these little conundrums to one side. So then this is what it's like. You have to get reborn in the second jhana realm. You are mind-made, which is kind of to be expected because the 5 senses are gone, so you're just mind-made. And you are feeding on rapture. Piti bhakka is the Pali word. And this means, presumably, that your sustaining in that realm depends on the rapture, the piti. Very powerful piti, of course, at this particular point. And you actually sustain your existence in that realm through the piti. So you have to enjoy piti, you have to enjoy yourself. If you don't enjoy yourself, bang, you're out of that realm. And we will see a couple of examples this later on what actually happens if that rapture disappears because you are acting in a silly way or whatever, then actually you lose that kind of rebirth. That seems to be the case. So this is actually how you're feeding on this. This is what sustains you. This is what kind of life there is all about, basically. It's about this rapture. There's nothing else that is of interest. The rapture is what sustains you. In many other cases in the human realm, what sustains us is all the sense pleasures, the sense pleasures in the world, that sustains us. We're interested in those. Another thing that sustains you in the human realm or in many realms is volition, the will, because we identify with the will. So doing gives us a sense of, gives us a boost, a sense of self, and that sustains that idea that you feed on that volition. That actually is what makes you want to live because you can do things. And then the final one is consciousness itself, the fact of experiencing anything at all. These are the 4 aharas in the suttas, and they are very related, I think, to what we're seeing here. The aharas that kind of keep you going. I forgot to say physical food as the last one. And here is a similar kind of thing. You're feeding on rapture, which is kind of nice. Can you see Vipasito? I'll come move a little bit to one side. Yeah. So you're stretching your neck a little bit. And so this is feeding on rapture, essentially. They're self-luminous and steadily glorious. They seem to be related to each other. In other words, they are obviously very beautiful beings. And their bodies are very subtle. So they are subtle man-made bodies. That's probably why they are self-luminous. It's just similar to a mind in samadhi. For those of you who, the way we describe things in the suttas about the samadhi, bliss and luminosity and light, because this is equivalent to those samadhi state. Your entire body becomes self-luminous because that's the body you have, is that brilliant light. And moving through the sky, which is kind of interesting. What exactly that means. The Pali is antalika chara. Antalika means like the sky or the air or something like that. And I don't think it means like they're up there in the sky moving around. I think it's more like the perception that they have. They're moving into this kind of realm, the sky realm, where there is nothing really tangible. That is probably part of the perception of these beings. So that's kind of where they hang out, in that air and sky. That's a kind of a nice description of these beings. You don't find that many descriptions of them in the suttas. This is one of the rare ones. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of cool, I suppose. And you remain like that for a very long time. Diga chirang titati or something like that. Digadana, so I can't remember now. So again, these realms last for a very long time because you are so still, and so you hang out there for a long time. So that's why it's kind of handy when the universe collapses. Kind of handy to hang out in a realm which lasts for a long time. Otherwise, you're in trouble. So that's what happens. So, any comments about that? Yes, Venerable. Yeah.
Wonder, I mean, traditionally when you think of the universe collapsing, you're really only thinking of the physical universe collapsing.
Yeah.
Why would it sort of apply to these, almost intangible sort of realms?
Yeah. Well, I think because they are somehow bound up with that universe in a subtle way. Well, we are certainly bound up with that universe. That's pretty obvious. Us and the animals are. But it says in the suttas that all the various sensory realms, from the Paranimitta Vasavatti, the highest kind of sensory realm, all the way down to the hell realm, these are realms that are tied to the physical existence. So, for example, they talk about, you have a planet Earth, you have a sun, and you have a moon. And then it talks about having billions of that kind of constructions. They're basically solar systems. It talks about having billions of solar systems, building to the second power, building to the third power. One of the suttas in Anguttara, I think Anguttara 3 is 81. Then it says that with each of these systems, they have a human, they have the 4 continents, they have a human society, they have the 4 great kings, they have a Tavatimsa heaven, they have the Yama heaven, they have the Tusita heaven. So they seem to somehow be related to that solar system. And it's not as if they probably see it in a different way, right? For them it looks quite different, but there's some sort of relation between the way they perceive things and the way we perceive things. And I think that is why it is possible, for example, they talk in the suttas about, leaving some offering for the petas. And that is because that food that you give to the petas, it exists both in our realm and in their realm. Yeah? But somehow slightly different in their realm. They probably see it different. That's why in the Peta realm, we often talk about Petas hanging out in a house after they die, even if they're ghosts. So you think, what's a different realm? What's that got to do with houses? Well, that house exists somehow in both realms at the same time. Yeah? So you hang out in that house. What they see is different from what we see. But there is some connection between the two. And so this is what I think is going on here. There is a connection between these various realms. And that is why everything collapses until you reach the Abhasra Loka, when you're kind of outside that whole universe. And you can kind of maybe you can even observe that universe, I'm not sure. And then you kind of, that's why you have to go such a high realm to remove yourself from that whole thing here. So even the lower Brahma realm seem to be collapsing at this point. The first, equivalent to the first jhana, seem to be somehow related to that physical universe. So in Buddhism, mind and physical matter is so it's so kind of involved with each other. They're not really separate in the way we think about things usually. Yeah. Who said? Did someone else want to say something? Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Second jhana was supposed to be related to the Brahma realm.
Yeah.
Extreme radiance was much higher.
This is the Abhasra Loka. Above that is I think it's called the Subhakina, is the third jhana, and the Mahapala is the 4th jhana. So this is the second jhana realm. And then you have the one below that is just usually it's called the Brahma Loka. That's where they talk about the Brahma's ministers and that kind of stuff in the suttas. It's usually 1st jhana. Yeah. According to the commentaries, there's different degrees to which the universe can collapse. And sometimes it can collapse apparently even higher up, depending on the kind of degree. And then you have to get reborn in the 3rd jhana, I think, to avoid it. I don't know about that. That's not in the suttas, but I don't know if that's just speculation or whether it's true. Okay. So that is the world contracting, yeah? And then as it contracts, all these realms disappear. So people, that's not really people, but beings are reborn in the Abhasra Loka, the realm of streaming radiance. And then things continue, yeah? There comes a time when after a very long period has passed, this cosmos expands, yeah? You get this really feeling of this pulsating cosmos, the bouncing cosmos, as some contemporary cosmologists call it. As it expands, an empty mansion of Brahma appears. Then a certain being, due to the running out of the lifespan or merit, passes away from that host of the radiant deities, in other words, the Abhasra Loka, and is reborn in that mansion of Brahma. There they are, mind-made, feeding on rapture, self-luminous, moving through the sky, steadily glorious, and they remain like that for a very long time. So, as the world expands, it is almost as if the various realms reappear one by one. And the first realm that reappears is the one directly below, the Abhasra Loka. And this is here, now we're talking about the first Brahma realm. And this is where you have this Brahma mansion. Yeah, I'm not sure what that exactly means. I guess it means a place where Brahmas hang out, I suppose, something like that. And so this is this come into being, yeah, these kind of various realms, and kind of one by one, and then that allows kind of you to get reborn into these realms as they kind of appear in this way. And it's interesting to what extent the mind is a prerequisite. The mind is kind of like a creator of this realm. There must be a very close connection with the mind and the potential of the mind to get reborn in places and these realms to appear, yeah. So it's kind of, there's probably much more mental involvement in this process than it seems. You might think of this as a purely physical process of the universe expanding, or the universe, you know, the Big Bang or whatever. But I think a lot of this actually has a lot of mental involvement, because there's always mind there, yeah? Mind is always present. We have the Abhasra Devas here. There's something, I think there is an interconnection here probably. So this mansion appears, and then a sentient being can get reborn there. And there's two reasons why you get reborn there, either due to the running out of your lifespan or the running out of merit. So the lifespan is that every realm seems to have a certain lifespan. When you have lived there for a certain length, you die from that realm. That seems to be regardless of your merit. But also, you may not have enough merit to sustain you throughout the whole lifespan. Yeah? So then you will die before the lifespan has come to an end. Or it could be that you have more merit than one lifespan. And then when the lifespan comes out, you get reborn exactly the same place, yeah, because you have more merit. All of these are possibilities. Anyway, so you pass away from the host, those Abhasra Devas. It's a bit of a bummer to get, you know, and then you get reborn in that empty Brahma mansion. Probably not too bad either, because there too you are mind-made, feeding on rapture, etc., just like the last time. Yeah, so you can see here what's going on. Yeah, everyone gets reborn in one place, and one being gets reborn in this new realm which has just appeared. So what happens to that one being? This is kind of the next thing. Yeah, this is kind of what it gets interesting. Yeah. But after staying there all alone for a long time, that being becomes dissatisfied and anxious. Oh, if only another being would come to this state of existence. Then other sentient beings, due to the running out of their lifespan or merit, pass away from that host of radiant deities and are reborn in that empty mansion of Brahma in company with that other being. They too are mind-made, feeding on rapture, self-luminous, moving through the sky, steadily glorious, and they remain like that for a very long time. So we have this being after a while gets lonely. Yeah, that probably means that it is no longer in a jhana state, but has a more active kind of mind where you have the ability to feel lonely. Maybe your metta is not as powerful as it was before or whatever, and you would like some company. And then you think, oh, it would be cool if someone got reborn here. And then it so happens, yeah, someone gets reborn around that time when you have that thought, because eventually someone will get reborn. As if you have that thought enough times, eventually a thought will coincide with someone getting reborn there. And then you can imagine what happens next. Now the being who was reborn there first thinks, I am Brahma, the great Brahma, the undefeated, the champion, the universal seer, the wielder of power, the Lord God, the maker, the author, the first, the begetter, the controller, the father of those who have been born and those yet to be born. So that's what they call the ultimate conceit. These beings were created by me. Why is that? Because first I thought, oh, if only another being would come into this state of existence. Such was my heart's wish, and then these creatures came to this state of existence. So first of all, so this is how conceit arises in a big way here. Yeah, it's a really big-time conceit. And so he thinks that he has become the creator, and it's kind of interesting. Yeah, you have this thought, oh, it would be nice if someone was here, and then you take that to mean that you have created these other beings. There's a bit of a leap there of judgment, but this is how often we work as human beings. Yeah, this is how we see the world. It's so biased very often. It so depends on all kind of underlying tendencies and things. And then you have this kind of powerful feeling that you are the creator of everything here. And you can see here, it's a very kind of, this kind of view is not, it's really kind of over the top, if you like. And if you look at this, the qualities you see there are very similar to the qualities we find, what we normally project onto the idea of a creator God. Yeah, the maker. Yeah, right. All of these things are really different words for saying I am the creator. Yeah. The maker, the author, the begetter, etc. And the controller, the person who controls what's going on. That kind of makes sense. The father, this idea of universal seer, it kind of gives this idea of someone who is omnipotent almost, seeing everything. And so you have this kind of very strong sense that this is very similar to the idea of a creator God, what you actually have here. Similar idea. And because these are eternalist ideas, it is also understood here that this God has existed eternally. Yeah, this is kind of part of this as well. It's not actually directly mentioned in this belief here, but it's part of this whole idea here. So you have the idea of being the creator, you have the idea of being eternal, yeah? You have the idea of having some really superpowers that are universal superpowers, and we're getting very close to normal ideas of a creator God here. And then, so he rationalizes this whole idea that he has been reborn into this realm first, and that he actually created these others. That's what's going on here.
Ajahn, question please?
Yes, please.
Say there was a continuum there, and what you've just described has happened.
Yeah.
The suttas talk about the fact that someone could regress because of defilements. Do you think that would lead to regression? That they were on their own and they wish others to come, they come, but then they project more defilements rather than less?
Yeah, I think that's probably exactly what's going on actually. And I think that is very much the message of the Aganya Sutta. The Sutta, Digha Nikaya 27. Which talks about precisely, it talks about the downfall almost of humanity. They start off in this really ethereal, I think, realm. And then gradually, as the craving and things kind of grow, they become coarser and coarser until they kind of sink down, until they end up as human beings. And of course, you can go further down than that, but that's kind of where it stops in a sense. So I think you're right. I think there's a probably similar kind of process happening here. These defilements are starting to come. The ego is starting to get involved. Yeah? You don't have any ego in the second jhana. Here the ego is starting to rise. And then gradually that develops in a bad direction. You want to control more. And So I think that's probably true. Yeah. So, Okay, let's... carry on this. I have no idea what time it is, but I'm just going to move on. And those beings who were reborn there later, they also think, this must be Brahma, the great Brahma, the undefeated, the champion, the universal seer, the wielder of power, the Lord God, the maker, the author, the first, the begetter, the controller, the father of those who have been born and those yet to be born. And we have been created by him. Why is that? Because we see that he was reborn here first, and we arrived afterwards. So again, a bit of a leap of the imagination. That's usually how we work as human beings. One of the things that comes out very clearly in all of these views is that people have experiences, and then they overinterpret those experiences. Yeah, this is what we find again and again and again. And this is exactly what we find in the world today. It's exactly the same thing. You experience something and you interpret it as something else. You add things to that experience. And this is a very important thing to remember, because this happens, of course, not just outside of Buddhism, it happens inside of Buddhism as well. It happens everywhere, because this is a proclivity and tendency of human beings to do this. So it's something that we have to be very, very careful about. So almost anything can be misconstrued. This also happens with the suttas. People read the suttas and they read all kinds of things into the suttas. And really, you have to be very, very careful. And you have to have, I think, to really fully understand what the Buddha is talking about, you really do need a fairly broad reading of the suttas to get a sense for what is going on. And then you start to gel and come together here. And even then, you can go wrong here. So it's tricky. So these people, everyone is now thinking that this God exists, right? There's a creator God. This is kind of becoming established. And the being who was reborn first is more long-lived, more beautiful, and more illustrious than those who arrive later. Illustrious also means more powerful here. Yeah, so, of course, God is going to be more beautiful than you. So, you know, it's like one of the characteristics that are required here. More powerful, all of these qualities. It is possible that one of those beings passes away from that state of existence, that host, and is reborn in this state of existence. This state means the human realm, always in the suttas, idda, iddupapanna. Having done so, they go forth from lay life to homelessness. By dint of keen, resolute, committed, and diligent effort and right focus, they experience an immersion of the heart of such a kind that they recollect that past life, but no further. So these are the things that we had a look at last time, yeah, the ideas of the kind of effort that you make, and these efforts here are very similar to the effort you find on the Noble Eightfold Path, because that's kind of effort that is required to reach samadhi. The only difference here is the idea of right focus, rather than being yoniso manasikara, it's samma manasikara. I mentioned this last time. And because if it's yoniso manasikara, you will expect him to become enlightened, because that's what yoniso manasikara does. And I think that's why you have the change here to samma manasikara. And then again, you experience an immersion of the heart, ceto samatha, yeah, or ceto samadhi, of such a kind that you remember your past lives. Yeah, so this is what happens when you have deep stillness of the mind, deep samadhi. You can expect sometimes to remember those past lives. And of course, what you remember is you remember hanging out with God. Yeah, that's what you remember. Yeah. Because that's what they've been saying. Oh, yeah, this is God. Yeah, I'm God. Okay. So this is what you can expect to happen next year. They say, he who is Brahma, the great Brahma, the undefeated, the champion, the universal seer, the wielder of power, the Lord God, the maker, the author, the first, the begetter, the control, the father of those who have been born and those yet to be born, is permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, remaining the same for all eternity. But we who were created by that Brahma are impermanent, not lasting, short-lived, perishable, and have come to this state of existence. So this is how the idea of a creator God comes into existence according to this sutta. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Is this a realistic way that the idea of a creator God arises in humanity? Maybe it is, maybe I don't really know. It's very hard to know. Well, the Buddha teaches it, so presumably there's a possible way anyway. Maybe he has seen that this is the one way it happens. Are there other ways that the idea of a creator God can arise? And yes, surely there are. And I think sometimes the kind of Christian theology provides certain of those bases of doing it. There are certainly many different ways, I think, in which the idea of a creator God can arise. Yeah. So the point here to me is not so much that this is the way that these ideas arise. The point here is that there are so many ways in humanity in which the idea of a creator God can arise. Yeah? And this is kind of the important point here. And the fact that everyone in the world says that they is a creator God, yeah? Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, kind of sometimes, it's a bit ambiguous in Hinduism. So the vast majority of the world's population says that there is a creator God. And some people would say, well, the majority of people in the world are Christian. They must be right? The majority is right. So you should be Christian. And that's, of course, complete nonsense. That's the last thing you should believe in. If the majority thinks something is true, you can be almost absolutely sure it's wrong. Yeah, that's kind of the reality of things. Because if the majority of people got things right, we would all be enlightened a long time ago. So the fact that there is a majority who says things, all it means is that, first of all, it is likely to actually be wrong, yeah? And it is likely to have arisen through one of these ways that we're seeing here. This is one way for it to happen. There are many other ways. So this is kind of an important point. And I think because these are the kind of arguments that are sometimes used by unscrupulous missionaries, when they kind of travel around. They say, oh, everyone believes in this, so you should believe it too. And it just preys on people's insecurity, really. But that is actually the wrong way of thinking about things. And in Buddhism, it's exactly the same thing again. What the vast majority of people within Buddhism thinks is true or right is actually likely to be false. It's only the Aryas who have right view. Anyone who is not an Arya, a noble person, is going to have some degree of wrong view. So their views at some point is going to be wrong. What the majority think is right is usually going to be false. It's a very useful kind of rule of thumb. So, sometimes you hear things like, oh yeah, everyone says that this monk is an arahant, so he must be an arahant. Well, actually, maybe that's a good reason to think he's not an arahant. Sometimes maybe he is, but there's no guarantee that he is just because many people say so, because most people are kind of deluded about things. So the same thing is kind of going on here. So creator gods are inherently problematic. And as I said before, this is kind of one reason, because the majority of people say so, and because there are a lot of psychological reasons why people would want to believe in a creator God. It's often very comforting. It's more comforting than Buddhism, which says you are responsible for yourself. I don't want to be responsible for myself. I can't deal with myself. I'm too dodgy to be able to deal with my own life. But being responsible for yourself is far more satisfactory than having some kind of external power you don't know anything about and leaving it in that power's hands. That's really scary, in my opinion. Who knows what this kind of being is? If you read the Bible and you read some statements about this creator God, I don't want to be in the hands of that creator God. It's a scary kind of God sometimes, depending on who you believe. So, in the end, it is far better to be responsible for your own life than to leave it in the hands of something else. And there are so many reasons why the idea of a creator God is a bad idea. And one of those ideas is what I said before, is that the idea of a eternal thing, something which is eternal, which is here postulated. You can see here how this here is derived. You over-interpret the data. You see this being, and then first of all you make them into a creator, then you make them eternal. But there's nothing that you have seen that allows you to say that this person is eternal. There's nothing in that experience that points to eternity. In fact, if you think about it, all experience that we can ever have is always limited in time. You can never experience anything as eternal. So when a Christian person tells you that they have experienced God, well, they've had some kind of experience, but it has nothing to do with the eternal creator God of Christianity, because that is by definition inexperienceable. It is by definition something that has been thought up by humanity. That is kind of what it is. And that's kind of really interesting when you think about that, because the whole idea of creator God starts to seem very, very unreasonable. Creation is exactly the same thing. Creation is not something that you can actually experience. You cannot never know for sure that the creator God creates the universe, because the creation obviously happens before your existence. So you're always going to be looking back and you're going to make assumptions about what happened without really being able to see it. And these are on top of all the other kind of typical arguments that go against the idea of a creator God. There are many, many more arguments that have been kind of devised over history, which I think are very powerful. Anyway, it's just the Buddha here making similar kind of arguments. So, this is the first ground on which some ascetics and Brahmins rely to assert that the self and the cosmos are partially eternal. Any comments on that? No comments? Everyone is quiet? Okay. So then let's move on to the second ground. The first ground here is by far the most interesting one in my opinion, but we'll go through the next three as well fairly quickly because they're far easier to go through. And what is the second ground on which they rely? There are gods called named depraved by play. We have to be careful in this monastery not to get depraved by play. They spend too much time laughing, playing, and making merry. And in doing so, they lose their mindfulness and they pass away from that host of gods. Yeah, so this is depraved by play. It's kind of interesting here. You may wonder, how come losing your mindfulness makes you pass away? It seems kind of strange. What is the sense behind this? And remember here that the idea of mindfulness in Buddhism, this is sati here, is not just mindfulness as we normally think about it in a meditation practice, but it also includes memory here. So here it seems more to do, they lose their memory here. And what they forget is to do those things that sustain their life, like eating here. And that's actually what the commentary says, that they forget to eat. Yeah? And because you forget to eat, that's how you pass away from that host of gods. So it's not just losing mindfulness, but it's actually losing your mind a bit more seriously than that. And that kind of makes sense of what is going on here, I think. Excuse me. It is possible that one of those beings passes away from that host and is reborn in this state of existence. Host means that group of beings. Having done so, they go forth from lay life to homelessness. By dint of keen, resolute, committed, and diligent effort and right focus, they experience a state of stillness of such a kind that they recollect that past life, but no further. They say, the gods, not depraved by play, don't spend too much time laughing, playing, and making merry, so they don't lose their mindfulness and don't pass away from that host of gods. They are permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, remaining the same for all eternity. But we who were depraved by play spent too much time laughing, playing, and making merry. In doing so, we lost our mindfulness and passed away from that host of gods. We are impermanent, not lasting, short-lived, imperishable, and have come to this state of existence. So here, there is no sense of creation. Yeah, there's no sense of any first point. So here there may not be any creation involved, but there's still the idea that there are certain beings that are permanent. Yeah, and again, exactly the same problem as before. You are over-interpreting the data. The data that you have is actually very kind of sparse, not much data at all. But you then read that data and then you say, oh, these beings must be impermanent, whereas I am impermanent. Yeah, this is what is kind of going on there. So similar kind of thing. Part of the world is permanent, the other part of the world is impermanent. You are the impermanent part.
Ajahn,
yeah.
not sure about the question, but I'll ask anyway. In there it says that the people, they left the host of the depraved by play gods and they came to this existence and they could only remember one previous existence, that which they came from.
Or back to that existence at least. Yeah.
But the inference they make is the gods without play had mindfulness.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem congruent with the statement in the Sutta because they can only remember the depraved by play gods. They've got no reference point for gods who aren't.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. I think that's a good point. I think that might be a, yeah. Yeah, so I think the idea here is that this is a subgroup of a larger group. Yeah, so you have a whole host. Maybe this is the four great kings, something like that. And within the group of four great kings, there are some subgroup which get depraved by play. Whereas the rest of the gods in that realm, they're not depraved by play. So when you think back, you are thinking back and you are seeing those gods, including yourself, who were depraved by play. They're all passing away. Yeah, so you see all those gods passing away. But you see the other ones who are not depraved by play in that host, they remain there. Yeah?
That was my point, because that doesn't come out.
It doesn't come out very clearly, I agree here. Yeah. But if you look at what it's saying here, they are they are laughing and making merry and they lose their mindfulness. So maybe are some who don't laugh and make merry too much, yeah, and they would not be those gods, yeah. So yeah, but it's not entirely clear. I agree with you. So that this is the second ground on which some ascetics and Brahmins rely to assert that the self and the cosmos are partially eternal. And what is the third ground on which they rely? They are gods named malevolent. They spend too much time gazing at each other. Or the word can also be called staring at each other. I looked at the Pali word here. So they grow angry with each other, and their bodies and minds get tired. They pass away from that host of gods. So it's kind of curious. Maybe it means having too much fault-finding mind. Yeah, maybe that's what it means. You're kind of staring at it, what you're behaving badly or whatever. And maybe something like that is going on, I'm not sure. Or maybe they gaze at each other. Maybe it also means lust, yeah, desire for each other. Maybe that's part of what is going on here. I'm not sure. And they gaze at each other, and then because of whatever defilements, that eventually gives rise to anger. And fascinatingly, when you get angry, the bodies and mind get tired. The Pali word for body here is kaya, and mind is chitta. And kaya here, as so often in the Pali Suttas, I don't think it just means physical body. It also means mental body. Yeah? So the parts of the mind, other than consciousness, perhaps. That's often how this is phrased in the suttas. And then that infects the whole mind, so to speak, when that happens. Interesting, yeah, that you pass away from some of these realms merely by the fact of getting angry, getting depraved, or you get tired. And the idea here, remember that when you get reborn in a higher realm, very often what sustains you in that higher realm is a higher degree of happiness. Yeah, like we saw before, piti bhakka, feeding on joy. And all of these realms, to some extent, you have a higher mental state. And if you lose that mental state, yeah, which is an energetic state, because energy comes with the joy, energy comes with the happiness. So when that is gone, well then presumably you die from that state as a consequence, because you lose those qualities actually sustain you in that particular realm, especially if you lose the piti when you're piti bhakka. I'm not sure if these gods here are probably slightly lower realm, but similar considerations probably apply to those lower realms as well. Yeah. Similar consideration, I think that's taken verbatim from Bhikkhu Bodhi, where when you read these things, you get infected a little bit by his language use. Okay, so you pass away from that host of gods. It is possible that one of those beings passes away from that host and is reborn in this human realm. Having done so, they go forth from lay life to homelessness. By dint of keen, resolute, committed, and diligent effort and right focus, they experience a stillness of the mind of such a kind that they recollect that past life, but no further. They say the gods who are not malevolent don't spend too much time gazing at each other, so they don't grow angry with each other. Their bodies and minds don't get tired, and they don't pass away from that host of gods. They are permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, remaining the same for all eternity. But we who were malevolent spent too much time gazing at each other. We grew angry with each other. Our bodies and minds got tired, and we passed away from that host of gods. We are impermanent, not lasting, short-lived, perishable, and have come to this state of existence. So again, similar kind of view, yeah, very, very, very similar to the previous one, just a different mechanism through which the people pass away, but basically the idea is exactly the same. It's kind of interesting that you have all of these permanent gods. Yeah, you don't have one permanent god, but you have a whole host of permanent gods, which is kind of fascinating, and that may perhaps be similar to maybe some of the ancient theories of gods in some of the, I don't know what the Nordic gods, whether they were considered permanent or not, maybe they were. So Thor could kind of chuck his hammer for all eternity. Yeah. But this is the third ground on which some ascetics and Brahmins rely to assert that the self and the cosmos are partially eternal. Yeah. Happy with that? Venerable brother?
It does seem like these beings who look back at one lifetime or towards that lifetime, they would at least notice that they have experienced rebirth, a second existence at least. You would expect that if they saw that of themselves and some of their peers, they might expect the same of.
Yeah.
And also they might come to the conclusion that they themselves, despite the rebirth, is also not finite, as in they will keep on getting reborn.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's lots of different conclusions or interpretations you could have of those experiences. I mean, I think there's heaps of them. Another thing I would think is that, well, if I grew angry in that realm, but should everyone will eventually grow angry, at some point, because that's what happens to beings, you know. So I agree. I don't think it's a very logical conclusion necessarily at all. But I guess it is the kind of thing that people still might think, you know. I've always been fascinated by, you know, how many very intelligent people end up believing in the Creator God, for example. It's a very common view, and some people who are supremely intelligent believe in these things. And I couldn't really understand it, because for me it seemed completely kind of weird. Yeah.
Well,
I
suppose I can understand that part, because what they're actually doing there is they're creating. Assigning reason for why some random events happen in their life.
Yeah, sure.
They may say, okay, this is because of some divine intervention.
Yeah, indeed, that's what they do. But I mean, you know, there is very kind of, it's not just that they assign a reason, but they kind of give a lot of shape to that reason in terms of it being eternal and being creator and being all kind of stuff. And there's all kind of things added to that idea. But I think sometimes what happens is that people don't want to think too deeply, and they just kind of take things fairly easily. I remember one of the people I knew. He was a double PhD, and he was almost a Nobel laureate in economics, and he was a Christian. And he was asked by his daughter. I happen to know his daughter, and she asked him, "Well, you know, do you ever kind of think about you know, whether God really exists, or whether kind of it makes any sense? Or that's too difficult. I'm not going to go there." Yeah, I think that is one of the reasons why these things happen. It's just that you focus on certain things in life, but sometimes you don't focus on those things that may actually be the most important things, which have to do with the very, you know, root of our existence and what, like, the meaning of life and these kind of things. Anyway, and this is why we have to be careful, because every one of us has these kind of biases, you know. And I'm sort of scared when you look at yourself and you look at your own biases, and you see the kind of crazy things that your mind sometimes thinks. It's kind of scary, because you know that you are no different from these people. It's just you're just hoping that you're on the right track. And I think there's a very good reasons for thinking that, but it's also very useful to be very humble about this and not kind of put ourselves on a pedestal, because we are subject to exactly the same problems, really, as all of these other people are here. Okay, let's come to the last one. The last one is a little bit interesting. It won't take us too long, so let's finish this off and then we'll call it a night. What is the fourth ground on which they rely? It is when some ascetic or Brahmin relies on logic and inquiry. They speak of what they have worked out by logic, following a line of inquiry, expressing their own perspective. And this is what they say. That which is called the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, or the body, that self is permanent, not lasting, transient, and perishable. That which is called mind, sentience, or consciousness, that self is permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, remaining the same for all eternity. So here we have the idea of making a distinction between the mind and the physical body. The physical body here in terms of the five senses, and then the mind as something separate. And it kind of makes sense, because it makes sense in a certain way, I should say, that people make this distinction, because the five senses are what connect us to the world. But you can get rid of those five senses, and you can kind of look at your inner life, and that inner life can exist apart from that outer world. You can will things internally, you can experience all kind of eternal stuff that is apart from that world. So it kind of makes sense to make that distinction, yeah? And so all that stuff which is concerned with the sensory existence, that is transient and impermanent and not lasting. It's interesting that that is called a self here, yeah? And the reason for that might be similar to the annihilationist perspective in Buddhism, that it exists for a short while, and then when you die, it disappears. But that existence it has while you're still living might be considered a self in the sense of it being there, yeah, being permanent, so to speak. Yeah, you have the ability to see last throughout life, the ability to hear last throughout life. So these things have a certain degree of permanence to them, and then they disappear when the body goes. That might be why it is called a self, but not a self in the final sense of the word. And then you have the other aspect here, and this is actually quite an important statement, this one here, that which is called the mind, sentience, or consciousness. Now these three words, mind, sentience, and consciousness, these are citta, mano, and vijnana. And these are, whenever you read arguments about, what is impermanent in Buddhism, what is permanent, these are the three words that always these kind of discussions revolve around. For example, it is very common, it's very hard to say that consciousness is impermanent, because consciousness is one of the five khandhas, one of the five aggregates, yeah, which are specifically said to be impermanent and non-self. So one argument you hear is that, yeah, consciousness is impermanent, but the mind goes on forever and is always permanent, yeah. So there's very often this idea of distinguishing between these different words for the mind and saying one of these is permanent while the other one is impermanent. Or mano is impermanent because mano is also related to one of the six faculties, yeah? But the mind is permanent. It's quite a common argument that you find. So the point with this one here, which is interesting, is basically that these three things are largely synonymous. Whether you talk about citta, whether you talk about mano, whether you talk about vijnana, they essentially refer to the same thing here. Yeah? Why is that? Well, the reason is, and these words are used usually a little bit differently in the suttas. So consciousness is the thing which knows, which is aware. Yeah, if you take everything else out of the mind, feelings, perceptions, this kind of thing, what remains, just the basic ability to be aware and to know things is consciousness. Mind, on the other hand, is kind of all mental content. Yeah, mano is more the mind as a separate thing apart from the five senses. Yeah, so they have slightly different references, and that's why people try to pull them apart. But if you think about it, they also have a lot in common. Yeah, because all of these three things are ultimately, they are the knowing aspect of the human being. Mind without the ability to know or be aware is nothing. It doesn't exist. Yeah? Sentience, the idea of mano, which is a mind, again, also can only exist if there is consciousness, something which is aware of it. And consciousness itself only exists when it is related to the other factors of mind. This is what you find in dependent origination, where you have namarupa paccaya vijnana, vijnana paccaya namarupa. This namarupa is the other aspects of mind and physicality, depends on consciousness for its existence, and consciousness depends on the other factors of mind and body for its existence. So these things are the same thing here. Yeah? None of these things they're not separate. They're referring to the same thing. They're just used in slightly different ways in the suttas to point to different aspects of the mind, different functions of the mind as we use the mind as the mind manifests in our life. So for this reason, this particular statement is very interesting, and it kind of undermines a lot of these kind of arguments that you often see, that kind of mind is eternal but not conscious, or consciousness is eternal but not mind, etc., which is really untenable anyway if you know the suttas well in many places. But these are the kind of arguments you see. There is another sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. This is in the Nidana Samyutta, the suttas on dependent origination. I think this is number 67 or something, what is it called? I can't remember what it's called now. I don't think I have any chance of remembering that. But I think it's around 67. And this has a very similar kind of statement. And many of you probably remember the sutta when I mentioned this. In that sutta, it says that if you're going to take anything as a self, you should take the body, because the body is seen to last for 80 years or 100 years or whatever, whereas the mind comes and goes all the time. It's always changing. Yeah? So if you should take anything as a self, you take the body, not the mind. But actually, it's the other way around. We will take the mind to be a self, not the body, because we can see the body dying here. And that sutta uses exactly the same expression, this thing we call citta, mano, and vijnana. Yeah, exactly the same idea is found in that particular sutta. So again, points to this idea that these are almost like synonymous. They're things that point to the same thing inside of us that we call mind or mental phenomena, etc. So an important argument in this whole thing about what the Buddhism actually is about, and what is impermanent and what is perhaps impermanent. One of the things that Bhikkhu Bodhi talks about in his book, I don't know if you have read it, is his explanation of this particular sutta, and you may want to read that if you have a chance. I would recommend it. Bhikkhu Bodhi writes really well, but sometimes he says weird things. And he says, one thing he says in there is that he says, one of the mistakes that people make outside, that anything that is permanent, they add the sense of self to those things that are permanent. So his argument would be nibbana is kind of permanent, so you add the sense of self to nibbana, that's why it is wrong. But that is kind of a weird argument. So in what sense is nibbana permanent? It's permanent in the same sense that cessation is permanent, right? Something comes to an end is permanent, but you cannot say that cessation is a self. That doesn't make any sense, yeah? Because cessation is ending. How can that be a self? So the whole argument is kind of really weird, because no one can possibly take cessation to be a self. In the same way, you cannot take nibbana to be a self, because nibbana is extinguishment. How can the extinguishment of something be called a self? Yeah? It's an ending. It's not a thing as such. So sometimes you read these things and you think, ooh, what is it talking about here? And so you have to really have your eyes and ears open when you read the suttas and you read commentaries, because it's so easy to get the wrong impressions. And sometimes even the most reliable commentators on Buddhism, sometimes they say things that are strange. So you have to always be careful. And that includes me, of course. I'm sure I've said lots of strange things over the years. I was going to say forget everything I said, but that would be going too far. Don't forget everything I said, perhaps, but take it with a pinch of salt. Okay, let's just finish this off. This is the fourth ground on which some ascetics and Brahmins rely to assert that the self and the cosmos are partially eternal. These are the four grounds on which those ascetics and Brahmins assert that the self and the cosmos are eternal, are partially eternal, and partially not eternal. Any ascetics and Brahmins who assert that the self and the cosmos are partially eternal and not eternal do so on one of these four grounds. Outside of this, there is none. Any last comments before I go to the concluding section?
Just add that, I
Yeah.
noticed with that last one, he doesn't actually give reasons for refuting it. He sort of says that it's wrong.
Yeah.
There's no kind of logical argument as to why that's the case.
Well, I think the Buddha says, well, this is I know this is wrong through my own experience. That's kind of how it begins out there, because I know this is wrong. So maybe it is hard to refute logically. Maybe sometimes you just know things and you know it's wrong. Yeah, I don't know. So this is kind of those things, yeah, about the thing is, if you're going to refute things through arguments, there's always going to be a counter-argument. Sometimes I think there is no end to argument and counter-argument. And I think sometimes it kind of comes down to, okay, the Buddha said this, I'm going to believe that until I've proven otherwise. Yeah, I'm going to kind of go with that and assume it's okay until I can prove it is wrong or something. Yeah, and you kind of go with that argument. But you're right. But I think many of the arguments that were earlier on about things not being eternal are valid for this kind of point of view as well, because you're saying that the consciousness is eternal. So the idea that things, the overestimation of your experience. I mean, you hammer things out with logic. I mean, one of the things the Buddha says in that I mentioned last time in the Kalama Sutta, maybe I should mention it here now as well, is that logic itself is always fallible, because logic always depends on certain premises. If the premises are wrong, the logic that derives from it also becomes faulty. Yeah. So it's like, and this is exactly what happens in people, because the premise is always there is a self. Because that is the premise, then all the logical structure that you derive from that faulty premise is going to be faulty. That's kind of where it comes from, I think. Okay. The realized one understands this. If you hold on to or attach to those grounds for view, it leads to such and such a destiny in the next life. So these views lead to rebirth. They don't lead to getting out of it. Why? Because you're grasping onto something. There's something you're taking as impermanent. He understands this and what goes beyond. Yet since he does not grasp that understanding, he has realized extinguishment within himself. Having truly understood the origin, ending, gratification, drawback, and escape from feelings, the realized one is freed through not grasping. And just to point out again what I pointed out last time, is that it is through understanding feeling that you understand views. It's kind of really fascinating here. And you understand that a lot of the reason why we have views, is because they feel right for us. There's some kind of feeling which is gratified when you have views. And the feeling that is gratified when with eternalism is the feeling that you want to exist. I want to exist. And if someone says you're not going to exist, you're going to be upset and unhappy about that. So this whole feeling is what gets gratified here. And so what happens is you're going to suffer as a consequence. That's the problem here. So watch out for those feelings. Yes, please.
In Pali, it's the feelings Vedana.
Vedana, exactly. Yeah. So it gives you a good Vedana when you think about existence. I'm going to exist. Hooray. So that's kind of positive feeling here. Yeah. I mean, that obviously positive feeling is, you can make it much more complicated, because, you can add things to it, but the basic kind of root of it is that it is a positive feeling in one way. Yeah. But obviously it's much more complicated in the way it manifests in the mind. These are the principles: deep, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful, sublime, beyond the scope of logic, beyond the intellect, I would say, subtle, comprehensible to the wise, which the realized one makes known after realizing them with his own insight. There you are. And those who genuinely praise the realized one would rightly speak of these things. So there you are. That is the next 4 views. And any last comments on these next 4 views? We only have 54 views left. These are the long ones. The first 8 are the long ones. So the last 54 are going to take as long as the first 8. So it's not as bad as it may seem. We're not going to be here forever like we were with the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. So maybe the Mahaparinibbana Sutta made you believe in eternity. I'm not sure, but that's what happens sometimes. Okay, so we do the Handamayang here.
Handamayang Dhammavadakataya Sadhukaram Dadama say.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
Okay. Will you liberate me, Venerable? Venerable? Liberation. Here we go. Thank you.
You're holding on your hands.
My glasses here.
Your less.
Okay, over here.
Oh, the placing of it.
Yeah.
Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami.
Ajahn, just now I was going to ask, because you say that the sentient beings, when it's contract, all of them go out to